as I mentioned last time, the idea for my novel, The Education of Crazy Jane, came from a visual memory of a mural that I saw in an apartment when I was in college at the University of Michigan. Once I started making up characters, Crazy Jane, her boyfriend Sam, a couple of other people, I thought there's a lot of history that happened in the late 60s. Maybe I should take a look at it and just refresh my memory and get a few dates in my head so I could get this right. So I found this book called 1968. That's the year when most of my novel takes place. This is by Mark Kurlansky. It was an overwhelming book to read because there's so many earth-shattering, breathtaking things that happened in 1968. I started making lists of events he discusses in here. I started a Word file, which became longer and longer. In order to organize my thoughts, I put up a bulletin board, and I got calendars month by month for the first 8 months of 1968, and I started to pencil in the important dates so I didn't miss any of them. I did that, but then I thought, I'm probably just scratching the surface. I'm going to have to actually do some homework here. So I got a book by Norman Mailer, Bad Boy of American Literature. It's called The Armies of the Night, and it's about the March on the Pentagon, October 1967. That's when a soldier put his bayoneted rifle up against my chest and said something like, "Where the hell do you think you're going, kid?" Norman Mailer wrote about that. He also wrote about Miami and the Siege of Chicago, the two political conventions in '68. The Democratic National Convention was held in Chicago. A peaceful crowd was attacked by police. It was one of the really low moments in American history. Mailer covered that. I talk in my book about the organization called Students for a Democratic Society. Jane is a member. So, of course, I had to go read the Port Huron Statement. 60 of their members, SDS members, went up to Port Huron, Michigan, and had a conference in the early 60s and put out a position paper, which was authored by no less than Tom Hayden. I read that book. And I kept reading No One Was Killed, about the Chicago Convention, the trial of the Catonsville Nine. One of the Berrigan brothers was involved. The Berrigan brothers were two Catholic priests who eventually went to prison for their anti-war protests. I have a character in the book named Anthony, who is Jane's brother. He is actually fighting in Vietnam and writing letters home. I was fortunate enough to find this book, Dear America, Letters Home from Vietnam. It is a gut-wrenching read, a collection of letters, because at the end of each letter you find out what happened to the combat vet. And in some cases it says Private Smith went home and started a family and had a very successful accounting business. And after other letters, it says, oh, Private Smith was killed 3 days after sending this letter home to his mom and dad. So you're reading each letter and thinking, oh my God, I hope you make it home, man. I continued to read Democracy is in the Streets. I read The Tragedy of American Diplomacy by William Appleby Williams. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X because I wanted to understand his role in the civil rights movement. I read The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan about the women's movement. I read, and then I watched the wonderful Ken Burns documentary on Vietnam. And I started interviewing people. I interviewed a number of combat vets who are still struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder because of what happened to them in Vietnam. I interviewed people who went to these big rallies and protested, and so on and so forth. So my original idea had to change, because my original idea was I was just going to wax creative and write a wild and wacky book about the late 60s. And then I went through all this history and it hit me, I'm writing historical fiction. And therefore, I have a responsibility to get that history right. I hope I did that. I think I did that. But you'll find out. The book is coming out in September of this year, 2024. And I hope you enjoy it. And thanks so much for listening. See you next time.